Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here with a very special guest coming to us from Florida, Mr. Bradley Mattis. Do I say your name correctly?
You did. You get a gold star because many do not.
Okay. Well, thank you for alerting me that the pronunciation of your last name. So, Bradley, I'm going to give you a little introduction to our viewers and listeners. Bradley Mattis is a veteran of the pro-life cause. He has over 50 years of a significant contribution and recognition in the pro-life movement in the U.S., and he's widely known for, even worldwide, for his passion for the preborn. He was president of the Life Issues Institute, where he hosted the daily Life Issues radio program, which is heard on over 1,200 radio outlets. He was also the host of Straight Talk on Life Issues, a weekly half-hour radio program. Brad is also a former assistant director of the National Right to Life Political Action Committee and former president of several state Right to Life organizations. He also served as chairman of the board of the Terry Schiavo Life and Hope Network and is the president of the International Right to Life Federation. Mr. Mattis has a master's degree in biblical studies and biblical counseling. He's also a frequent international speaker and lecturer on life issues. He works with other countries to establish a pro-life education network and presence. He's done considerable research on abortion's impact on men and speaks frequently to the effects of abortion on men. His writings on the subject have been released in the U.S. and in international publications. Bradley also serves as a men's post-abortion counselor. He was executive producer and host of a weekly pro-life television program called Facing Life Head-On, which was available to over 100 million households across America and throughout Canada. And that program has garnered 3 regional Emmy Awards. Unquestionably a family man, Bradley and his wife Ellen have 4 sons and 6 grandchildren, and they reside in Tampa, Florida. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us. And I'll just tell folks that I first saw your name or heard you speaking on a Zoom call that was conducted partly through the Alliance for Life Ontario, and our good friend Jackie Jeffs was part of that. And you were talking about brain death and organ donation, and I since have watched the 2-part series you have on the Life Issues website, The Surprising Realities of Brain Death and Organ Donation, and those are excellent. We're going to have links to them in the show notes. But anyway, thank you again for joining us. You've recently retired from the one position. I'm sure that you're not retired from the pro-life movement,
Well, absolutely not.
which you've been at for at least most of your adult life. When did you first become, we're going to focus on there's so many aspects of the pro-life issues and the challenge in our society, but when did you first become aware? We're going to focus on the organ donation and brain death, which you brought out the aspects of that so clearly in these videos. When did you first become aware of the connection between organ harvesting and brain death?
Well, Rod, we began to get inquiries coming into the Institute. We're getting bits and pieces of news of concern. So we were doing the weekly TV program Facing Life Head On at the time. So I did research supported with my staff, and we spent a good full year of researching this topic before we covered it. We wanted to make sure our facts were right and that all of our ducks were in a row. So what we showed then through 2 documentaries, part 1 and 2, are fully documented information and considerable shining a light on such an evil industry, as we will get into details, I'm sure.
Right. When did the term brain death or brain dead begin to be used? Are you aware when that began?
Yes, that came into being with the advent of organ transplantation and donation. It's kind of comparable, Rod, to what they did with abortion and the birth control pill. The birth control pill, part of it impacts implantation of that tiny living human embryo into the womb. And they knew that would be problematic and seen as a very early abortion. So they changed the definition of conception from the moment of fertilization of the sperm and egg to when that week old, approximately week old human embryo implants. So from fertilization to implantation. That way they got around that thorny issue of abortion. Now, they did the same thing with organ donation. They knew that that was going to be problematic. So they coined the term brain death, and it brings with it a whole rat's nest of problems as far as carrying that out. The definition is is kind of foggy in itself, and it says brain death, adjective referring to the complete cessation of brain activity above the medulla oblongata. Now, that sounds very medical and something that we should not question, but we should, because I think then we need to pay attention to what the American Academy of Neurology, they set out guidelines for brain death determination, and this is some very damning information. And this was on their website till they found out that I had captured it and was citing it. So it's not there anymore, but we do have it. And let me quote what they said. Many of the details of the clinical neurologic examination to determine brain death cannot be established by evidence-based methods. Wow. The detailed brain death evaluation protocol that follows is intended as a useful tool for clinicians. And here's an important part. It must be emphasized that this guidance is opinion-based. Brain death determination is entirely subjective. And to kind of drive that idea home, there was research done in 2016 by the Journal of American Medical Association Neurology. I mean, that's one of the top medical publications. And they studied hospitals and found out, examining 500 hospitals, and found huge discrepancies in how brain death was defined and how it was applied in those hospitals. So we shouldn't be surprised, Rob, that we're finding all kinds of efforts to use it as euthanasia for the purpose of organ donation.
Well, so I think what our viewers and listeners, many of them may realize this, but it became crystal clear to me in watching your documentaries and hearing you speak on it at the earlier call, that most organ transplants, the organs that are taken from people for transplants, are taken from living bodies. Most, if not all. Can you?
All.
In other words,
Yes.
when people sign an organ donor card, I think most people think that they are going to be stone cold dead, and they don't mind if the parts they no longer need are taken to benefit someone else. But
Yes.
the reality is all of these are taken from living human beings who have not yet died.
Yes. The medical reality, Rod, as you said, is that no organ can be harvested from, as what we understand, to be a dead patient. Now, most people, when they sign those organ donation cards, think that after the family says their final goodbyes, um, and the heart stops beating and there's total death of the body, then they share those goodbyes quickly, and then they're wheeled into another room where the harvesting of organs happens. That is not what happens at all, because organs are dead to the medical community, no pun intended, but they are of no value if that heart has not been beating oxygenized blood through these organs at the time of harvest. So what we're talking about, and this is a shocking reality, is your organs are being fed with blood from your beating heart. And what they have to do to get those organs is stop your beating heart and actually medically kill you to get them. Now, there are, of course, different parts of your body that can be ethically harvested. And I want people to understand that, for instance, your cornea, your skin, your bones, your bone marrow. Many of us who have had surgeries have cadaver bone put into our spines to help with surgically keeping those bones together. So there are ethical ways that can be done, but certainly not with the organs.
Yeah. So a heart, a liver, a lung, a kidney, those, although there's an awful lot of growth in that industry, in the organ transplant industry, those cannot actually be taken from someone who is already clinically dead.
And of course, organs of kidneys, for instance, or parts of liver can be donated from a living donor who is not killed in the process.
Right. Okay. And that's another useful distinction. Let's talk about the what's behind the organ transplant industry. Is there money involved, or are these folks doing it out of the goodness of their heart?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's demonic and terrible to really chuckle at that, but the idea of it being done with good ethics in mind is laughable. There is a gentleman by the name of Dick Teresi. He is no way pro-life. He is absolutely pro-abortion, and he used to support organ donation. He wouldn't be a part of our documentary because we were a pro-life organization. He wrote a book called The Undead, and here are some problematic details he put in this book for the organ donation industry. The transplant industry generates $20 billion a year. Now, this book is not written last year, so I'm sure that money has skyrocketed since then. Over $1 billion alone are used for immunosuppressive drugs. I'm sorry. So that's just one little piece, but that generates over $1 billion. Transplant surgeons are paid very well for their craft of pulling organs out of live bodies. Hospitals receive a finder's fee, and that's what they call it, finder's fee, explained as administrative costs, plus billing insurance companies for services. So just imagine you're a hospital that harvests organs. You will be able to bill for the surgical suite, the surgeons and medical staff, and everything that goes along with it to harvest those organs. Now, if you are also a hospital that can put those organs into an ailing body, then think of all the billing that you can do for that. And we're talking millions of dollars. So it is absolutely money driving this. If we could take out the money aspect, Rod, that this would probably go away very quickly.
Yeah. There's, of course, some of our viewers and listeners would be aware that there's a huge organ harvesting business in China. And there are even people from the West that go to China to receive an organ transplant. And of course, in China, they don't have a lot of ethical concerns, at least the government doesn't, of ethical concerns about removing organs from living bodies of prisoners, Falun Gong practitioners, and so on. What really touched me in your documentary was many things, but the interview with Jenny Hammond. She and we're going to include a portion of that clip in this final product of this edition of CHP Talks. Thank you for permission to do that. She has been a nurse, but she was lying on a hospital bed and considered brain dead. And they were about to remove organs from her and were speaking of her as if she were gone. She recovered miraculously from that coma. She came out of the coma, became a nurse, and has done a tremendous amount of wonderful work as a compassionate caregiver since that time. But she was lying there and was considered an organ donor, like she was, well, she said one nurse treated her like a piece of meat. That really touched me. For folks watching, I'm going to cut in that clip right now, a short portion of the interview that Brad Mattis did with Jenny Hammond. It's so powerful. You've got to see it and hear it.
Jenny Hammond was a registered nurse for 12 years and is a former executive director of California Nurses for Ethical Standards. Her desire to become a nurse began 30 years ago when her life almost ended. Jenny had a history of small epileptic seizures, and in 1985 she contracted Giardia and was treated with Flagyl. This medication is contraindicated for patients with central nervous system disorders. The first dose caused a grand mal seizure. Jenny's husband was unable to wake her the next morning, and she was later declared brain dead.
The next time I was aware of anything, I was in the ICU. I was unable to move, to speak, to open my eyes. I was what they call locked in. But I was fully conscious and aware of what was going on around me. There was one nurse I remember very well. She would speak to me every time she was in the room and let me know what she was doing, why she was there. She called me by name. There was another nurse, I came to recognize her footsteps and the little sounds that she would make, but she never spoke to me until one day I heard her voice. Would somebody come in here and help me move this thing?
Seriously?
Seriously, she called me this thing. I was a piece of meat. I was a burden. Time was hard to judge. I had awake times and asleep times. And when I was awake, I understood everything that was going on. But I wasn't always awake. I did have sleep time. And one of the awake times, I heard multiple footsteps coming into the room. And one male voice saying, this one's a sad case. Young woman, 2 small children at home. Her husband is being completely unreasonable. If he would just sign the forms, so many people could benefit from her organs. And I thought, you can't have my organs. I need my organs. There was another voice spoke up and said, Doctor, is it appropriate to talk like this in front of the patient? He said, hello, she's brain dead. She can't hear anything. She doesn't understand anything. There's nothing there. She only has about a 1% chance of coming out of this coma. And if she does, she'll be a vegetable.
So your determination was pretty strong at that point, I'm
Pretty
guessing?
strong at that point. It was less than a week later I came out of the coma.
Jenny was in a coma and on a ventilator for 3 weeks, and it was a long road to recovery once she woke up. After her experience, Jenny chose to become a nurse with a passion to compassionately care for people who experience situations similar to her own. She believes patients with brain injuries and brain death diagnoses are not necessarily dead. Instead, families and patients should be afforded hope, time, and a right to basic care.
And you gave another example, I think, in the discussion that we had on Zoom a couple months ago. You gave another example of a person who came back from being scheduled to be an organ donor. Do you recall that?
Well, there are so many,
Oh.
and I think I relayed a couple of them. And here's one that I think was probably in that group of examples. Pastor Ryan Marlowe. Now, he suffered a brain injury due to an infection. And just weeks later, they labeled him brain dead and told his wife, Megan, that he was, quote, clinically deceased, even though his heart, of course, was beating and other things seemed to look good as far as his organs and everything go. They actually put a time of death on his chart, even though everything else was looking great. It was the brain that had him in that hospital. Ryan was an organ donor, which shouldn't surprise us with this situation. So 3 days later, 3 days, and he was young enough that healing in the brain would happen quicker than many people, but we need to have patience with any major brain injury because it takes time for those brains to heal. And they weren't willing to give Ryan that time. They told her that they planned to harvest them while he was left on life support. And then out of the blue, the doctors called Megan and said he wasn't brain dead, but couldn't live without life support. Well, I'll tell you what, when I had my heart surgery, I was on life support for a day or two, and I was very much alive, of course. So that is not a definition of death. They told her they would adjust the time of his death to when they harvested Ryan's organs. Now, can you imagine that? Common sense would seep in and tell us that this is an outrage. This is murder of a patient, actual murder. They scheduled the harvesting his organs, and one of Ryan's nieces came in the room and playing videos of his children singing. And he moved his feet, surprise, surprise. And he made a full recovery, and he's back in the pulpit.
Wow.
So this is just one example, Rod, of many, many, many that are taking place. And for instance, every state in America allows the withholding of food and fluids for patients that they deem worthy of that type of death. You mentioned my involvement with the Terry Schiavo Life and Hope Network, and that was perhaps the most publicized situation. But this is happening every day, and I can only imagine how many are happening up in Canada.
Yeah, and we know that it's going on. I don't have Canadian statistics on that. We of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're in a battle for the sanctity of human life, and it starts in the womb and it goes on to the senior years and the final years of a person's life. There is a culture of death that is does not respect human life, wants to take it whenever it is seen as less useful. Of course, go back to Hitler for the phrases, useless eaters and things like that. But there is that aspect of our society, tragically, that is so willing to take a life rather than give proper care. And in Canada, we have medical assistance in dying. I don't know how many states in the United States have that, basically euthanasia as a part of their so-called medical systems. But in Canada, it's universal across the country.
We have 10 states in America that have varying degrees of assisted suicide and euthanasia. But I'll tell you what, we have on our website at lifeissues.org a global map showing every country, every state that has legalized euthanasia or assisted suicide. And we have documented the slippery slope downward in every single one, Ron. Every single one has resulted in ghastly termination of a patient's rights, all for the benefit of organ donation. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to share some of Canada's timeline. In 2016, Canada legalized assisted suicide by a doctor providing the lethal medication or whatnot, but the patient had to take it. And then in 2020, they legalized euthanasia. And just, a short time later, they're talking about legalizing euthanasia of children without their parents' consent. All kinds of actual appalling things. These are so horrible that you can't imagine them being true. But Canada is an example for us in America, which I bring up frequently, that we need to look to our friends up north to see what's happening there so that we can prevent it from happening in the United States. Sadly, though, Rod, in some of the states, there is no resident requirement for this, and it's a one-way death industry for like some of those states like Vermont and Oregon. It is a way that they can legalize it. And, they've talked about, they've actually gone on record saying we just need to get in the door, get the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak. And then we'll work on expanding that later, because some of their supporters were upset that this legislation they were introducing was so limited in what they could do. And they said, just hold on. We just need to get it legalized, and then we'll get rid of that. And I'll tell you, the so-called safeguards for patients dropped like flies in many of these states.
Yeah, well, in already a couple of years ago in Canada, I know the number of euthanasia deaths or MAID deaths has exceeded the number of Canadian soldiers that died in World War II. It just, we go to the Remembrance Day services, and we certainly respect those who gave their lives for our country and for our freedom. But the reality is now we're popping people off, pushing them off the edge of the cliff as if they were just, if there was no value to their lives whatsoever.
And Rod, it's an industry, as we've talked about, and it begs the question, are physicians in their treatment of patients in their final days or hours using medications or not using medications, not for the benefit of the patient, but with an eye looking for organ donation? And will this treatment, this medication benefit the patient, but will it hinder them being viable organs after so-called death? We've seen that, Rod, very clearly with the abortion issue. Mm-hmm. It's been documented that abortion mills in America have altered their technique for abortion because they want those body parts to be viable for experimentation and sold.
That's right. You have, in the States, you've had some tremendous undercover research done about that organ harvesting industry with the preborn, and it's a huge industry. There's a lot of money exchanging hands. The lives of these little infants never seen the light of day, and they're being sold off by parts, and it's unbelievable. But same thing, of course, as you mentioned, is happening with accident victims, those who are suffering from a brain injury, and it's just unbelievable. What else do we need to talk about? We don't know exactly the connection in Canada between medical assistance in dying and organ donation, but I suspect there's a connection there. It may not be universal. I don't know about what those chemicals that they use for MAID have to do. Of course, a few years ago, it just seems like just maybe decades ago that there was a lot of concern about suicides, and every effort was being made to prevent suicides. Now the government is paying for people to commit suicide in a controlled circumstance, and it's just unbelievable.
That's a good point you made, Rod, because patients have talked about being denied medical treatment that would extend their lifetime, but they were offered euthanasia because it only cost a few bucks for the medication. We thought a study was done on and published in the Southern Medical Journal in 2015 about how euthanasia impacts suicide. And of course, the people that promote this often said, well, that'll decrease the need or the desire for suicide. But that defies common sense, Ron. If you just stop and let that common sense sink in your brain, then you realize that they have taken away any psychological roadblock to suicide because they have put their stamp of approval on it. They've just made it so-called medicalized, end quote, instead of jumping off a bridge.
Right, exactly. And it's been, like you say, there's given a stamp of approval for it, which now in Canada, you mentioned about the expansion of it. They just get their foot in the door and then they can expand it. Well, they already have passed legislation, the Liberal government in Canada, to include mentally ill in medical assistance in dying. There is a petition now, there's a bill in Parliament to try to reverse that. They postponed the implementation for a time, but really the law on the books right now, which was set to come into effect in the spring of next year, allows mentally ill people to access to access MAID. And you really could draw a line between a brain dead person and a mentally ill person. There's a damage, there's a dysfunction taking place in the brain, and we for years, decades, we have wanted to help the mentally ill recover, right, and to become functional again and to take their place in society. And we ought to be looking at the same, ought to be showing the same compassion for those who have been brain injured through an accident or infection or whatever, and yet this trend that we're discussing is so nefarious in that it takes that compassionate drive that we all have as human beings to well, first of all, to survive ourselves, but then to help others. And it's turned it around and made it look like that the doctor is helping people because, relieving suffering and that type of thing, and rather than helping them recover. And like you say, it is cheaper. It's cheaper to bump somebody off, and especially if you get to sell their organs, it's not only cheaper. It's there's money involved. Terrible.
Well, yeah, and you have a government-controlled healthcare system, a one-payer system,
Right.
and that weighs heavily in the decision-making process of whether patients should be treated or offed, regardless of their value of organs or otherwise. Elderly people often are a drain on medical resources, and so I think we're seeing your society really lean toward making the elderly more vulnerable. And once we put a price tag on people, that price will only go in one direction. It'll never go up. It goes down. And as you alluded to in your comment, we are changing the culture of Canada and America and other countries from being compassionate and supportive and loving for people who are needing that support into, well, let's just off them. We are seeing children and grandchildren who want to get their hands on their inheritance. And as a result, decisions are being made not in the best interest of the patient, but in the best financial interest of the family members.
Well, very sobering information. And I want, before we close, I'm going to give you the last word, but before we close, I want to tell people that in Canada, most of our viewers and listeners are in Canada, we do have the Delta Hospice Society. We also have the Euthanasia Prevention with Alex Shanberg, but the Delta Hospice Society in Delta, BC, with Angelina Ireland, the executive director, they have a card. I've just printed off sort of a facsimile of it, but they have a card called they have a package, and it's free. Go to deltahospicesociety.org, and you can get this package, Do Not Euthanize, DNE. The hospitals like to use the DNR, Do Not Resuscitate, but Angelina Ireland is using the DNE, Do Not Euthanize, and it says, this card, which they'll send you, says, I require health care, not MAID. And it says, I, Jane Doe, have signed a Do Not Euthanize Advance Directive. So it's one of the tools that we can use to defend ourselves. I'll put the links to that also in the show notes, so you can get to the Delta Hospice Society and request their Do Not Euthanize package. So, Bradley, again, I want to thank you so much for being with us. What maybe there's something we haven't covered that you'd like to include in this episode on pro-life, and especially coming against this terrible, I don't know what you want to call it, a strategy of the death culture to kill people for their organs. Anything you would like to add?
Well, I would. You mentioned hospice, and when we were doing the television program, Rod, we could not find a single hospice in the United States of America that would go on record saying that they would not withhold food and fluids from patients or give medication that eventually took their life. What we're seeing expanded here is something called lethal sedation. And I saw that take place with a member of my own church, where they give pain medication that is not required because the patient isn't in pain, but this pain medication slows respiration. So this lethal drip, drip, drip eventually takes the lives of so many patients. And how do we combat this, I think, is what we all need to talk about before we go. And that's that we need to educate others to the reality. So many people think that what direction this is going is too horrific to be true. We were of that opinion when we started researching this. What we were hearing, I thought, well, that can't possibly be true. They wouldn't allow this to happen. Well, it is, and they do allow it. So education is, of course, the utmost importance. you need to make sure that somebody you trust, somebody who understands your value of the respect and dignity of human life, is making those decisions if you can. My wife and I have each pointed the other to make those decisions, and we have talked about what is good and what is not, and you need to do that. And of course, part of the education process is go to websites. We have a great deal of information on lifeissues.org, lifeissues.org, on the details, the ins and outs of euthanasia and assisted suicide, and Canada is very prominently included in that information.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that is absolutely key, that we help other people understand where we're at today, what hour it is in our I guess the collapse of our civilization in terms of the value we put on human life. And we want to reverse that, of course. If we could say maybe our society could be considered brain dead, but we need to wake up our society, come out of the coma, and get back on track of recognizing the sanctity of human life, the supreme value that God put on every human life. And we're made in His image, and we have a special treasure from Him, and that is our life. We want it to honor Him, and we want to use it to the utmost. And every breath we draw, I know my brother passed away at an early age from leukemia, but before he died, he said, every day is a gift. And I think we want ourselves, our families, our fellow citizens to look on life that way. Yes, we as Christians, we have an eternal destiny, and it's not over when we go to the grave. But for our impact in this earth, their opportunity to impact the lives of others, that's while we're living and breathing. So we need to focus on that. And we will be including, as I mentioned, and thank you again for allowing us to include that a portion of that interview with Jenny Hammond in this episode. So powerful.
You're very welcome.
Bradley Mattis, thank you so much for joining us today, and you're continuing to make a tremendous contribution to the pro-life movement. We wish you and your family a wonderful Christmas season. We're approaching that time now, and I guess you have Christmas even in Florida, right?
You know, I love Christmas down here. Putting up Christmas lights on the outside of the house in shorts and flip-flops never gets old.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, we have to put on our boots and coats to put our lights up out here. We have snow on the ground already here in northern BC, but we always look forward to this Christmas season, a time of reflection, celebration, and we want to focus on enjoying and making the most of the life that God has given us. So thank you for joining us today. God bless you.
Thank you for having me, Rod. It's been an honor and privilege.
And we'll be back next week with another edition of CHP Talks. Thanks.